Welcome to the RSP Quick Game. I'm Matt Waldman with Mark Schofield. We're here for about an hour to talk about the NFL. We're going to ask questions of each other that are no more than about a minute long for us to answer. We're going to time it. We'll each get a few timeouts. During those timeouts that we decide to call before we answer the question, we get 3 minutes to be able to talk about the NFL and whatever question that we have. What do you think, Mark? You ready?
I'm ready as I'll ever be on this Thanksgiving Eve installment of the Quick Game.
Exactly. So we're going to get this going because I know that we're both kind of pressed for time. We're both cooking the meals and we're going to do what we need to do here. So leading it off, Mark, would you have paid Ezekiel Elliott franchise money? And does he remain a top talent in your eyes, regardless of the physical arguments that our green visor brethren are griping about?
Green visor brethren, that's fantastic language to kick things off here. I think in a sense, these are two different questions. Is he a top talent? I think absolutely he is. I just got done watching Dallas, New England in the cold and the rain and the wind and the elements. And as a Patriots fan, when I was watching that game, I breathed a sigh of relief every time Dak Prescott dropped back to pass rather than handing the ball off. And that's not because Dak is a bad quarterback this year or is a bad quarterback, period. He's playing at an elite MVP kind of level. It's just in that game, I was much more afraid of Ezekiel Elliott running the football. They were a much better offense when they were handing the ball off, and maybe the conditions played into that. And you could look at expected points added per play, where Prescott was a minus 0.29 per drop back in that game, whereas Elliott was basically even for the day, which is pretty good as far as run game goes. So I think that he's still a very talented running back and means a ton to this offense. Now, the franchise money thing is a bit different because I think we have to sort of look at the overall roster construction, and Ezekiel Elliott's franchise deal might make it harder to build pieces around Dak Prescott, like Amari Cooper, and bringing guys like that back. So that makes it a different question. But even saying that, I think Elliott is the kind of talent at the running back spot that they are rare, but when you have a guy like him, you pay him.
Yeah. So I think it was very astute of you to note that these are two different questions, which to me also inherently says these are two different lanes.
Yeah.
And those lanes are, some people, listen, it's just like fandom. Some football writers, they're like your Uncle Al, who basically wants to weigh in on everything, and thinks he has an answer for everything because he stayed at the Holiday Inn or your basement couch the night before and decided that he is now qualified to be able to talk about everything. I'm not going to talk about the physical because I don't keep up with it. I have zero interest in it, and I'm really all just about the talent and what happens on the field. So, to me, whether he deserved the money or not, he is a top talent. He remains one. I think some people get a little confused when they try to don the green visor and then they still have it on when they're looking at the TV. And as a result of that, they can't really see what's going on, but they rely on, maybe they're starting to rely on their spreadsheets a little too often when it comes to Ezekiel Elliott. The guy's an elite back. Maybe his offensive line isn't quite as good. I haven't looked into that. What I do see is that he turns losses into gains.
Yep.
He turns small gains into bigger gains. He can catch the ball out of the backfield regardless of the griping there. And I think that overall, this is still one of the elite backs in football and is a massive difference maker and played rather well last night. And he's on pace to exceed last year's production. In fact, he's very close to doing so next week in terms of touchdowns. Last year, I think he had 12 games with over 100 yards plus from scrimmage. He's already, I think it's 7 or 8, as of now in week 12. I don't know. I think that this is something that we'll talk about more later.
I bet we will. But yeah, he's a tremendous talent at the position. And I know people don't want to value the running game or running backs, but there are that elite group that are different. And I think he's definitely one of those.
Yeah, I'm going to add one last thing to this, and this is our little warm-up question. We'll get into the rest, is that this whole idea of EPA, I've had multiple people who seem to be highly qualified, at least in their source of work and what they do, tell me that the EPA used in our quote unquote football journalism community is completely screwed up, and that they haven't gotten it cross-checked, and they've derived information from it that is false. And if they had bothered to look into the code, that they might have seen that. I'm going to verify that before I publish anything about that. But that's something on my mind this summer, because if people are posting basically bad work, and and part of it is leading to them to have a completely horrible idea of Ezekiel Elliott on a national scale, because national writers are taking that information, not bothering to get it cross-checked. If they don't know about, coding, they don't know enough about statistics, they don't know enough about math to basically do that themselves, then that's an interesting story to me.
And
so
just to sort of dovetail off of that, I think beyond the coding issues, EPA, and I've been told this by various people, overweighs the importance of third downs. And while third downs are important, like if you throw an interception as a quarterback, it doesn't matter if you throw it on first down, second down, third down, or fourth down. Like you turned the ball over. And so I think, and I know some people like Bryce Rossler, for example, just did a piece over at SIS on this concept where, interceptions matter regardless of what down you threw it on. And so I think the more people look at EPA, it's just another tool. It's not sort of a be all and end all, nor should anything really be an be all and end all. You put it all together and, form your opinions.
Yeah. And there definitely needs to be a structural underpinning under it if you're going to walk along on top of it. So, let's move on to somebody who maybe seemed like a couple years ago, his structural underpinning of being a starter was gone. And now it seems like that foundation has been rebuilt in Tennessee, and that's Ryan Tannehill. Do you think he's earned the job for 2020?
I think so. I mean, I think, Tennessee might be smart to draft a quarterback, it's somewhere in like day 2, that range, in the mid rounds. But I think if you look at what Tannehill has done over the past couple of weeks, he's put up elite type numbers at the quarterback position. You're talking about a guy that's posted now an adjusted net yards per attempt of 7.59, which is 7th in the league. He's got 2 fourth quarter comebacks, 3 game winning drives. He's thrown 10 touchdowns. His touchdown percentage of 6.5 is also a top 5 number in the league, behind just Lamar Jackson, Russell Wilson, Kirk Cousins, and Matthew Stafford. I mean, those are MVP type numbers. And the bottom line, more than anything else, we know this. Even though quarterback wins are not a quarterback stat, they're not a stat, period. Winning matters in this league. They are 4-1 with him as the starting quarterback this year. He has played them back into the mix in this AFC South race, and with Indianapolis struggling at times and Houston struggling at times, there's a good chance that Tennessee gets into the playoffs thanks to making the switch to Ryan Tannehill. So I don't see how you couldn't enter 2020 with him as the starting quarterback. Like, it just seems like he's earned that job.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the turkey. I hope that's not the turkey timer. Then you better be worried about what's in your turkey.
That's a Christmas vacation situation you get there.
That's right. Exactly. Grandma better not bring the Jello over where it smokes a little bit, but I agree with you. Ryan Tannehill's playing great. Just from a simple fantasy football perspective, in terms of looking at points per week, for the past, I believe, for every start that he's made since, I think it's either 5 or 7 weeks now. I think it's 7, and he's played 6 games, and a lot of quarterbacks have played 7. He's still the second most productive fantasy quarterback in formats. So to put it on an overall view, this is a guy that's playing extremely well. I love the way that, in contrast to Marcus Mariota, he runs the ball a little smarter. He's equally dynamic, if you ask me. I mean, this could have been a pro slot receiver in the NFL. He's certainly a guy who is making the throws and finding the open man. And I think he fits well. His style of play fits well for what the Titans want to do. And imagine what he gets when he has a full summer to work with these receivers as the starter, and not just a guy who's getting cleanup reps here and there.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You could go into next year building the offense around what he's done and what he can do. You could be successful.
Yeah. So speaking of guys who have basically made a lot of money off of their success. Nick Foles, with his Super Bowl performance, he got signed to some decent money, some pretty big money actually in Jacksonville to be the starter. Got hurt game one. Got Gardner Minshew comes in, and Minshew basically plays well enough for a while that the Jaguars are competitive. And then, the prospect of Foles coming back, we start to see Minshew fall apart at the seams a little bit, and they bring Nick Foles in. And you have to ask yourself, I mean, did the Jaguars want to have a plan for somebody else? Because if they did, they could have traded Nick Foles just on the mystique of Foles being a starter that they just opted not to use and continued to go with Minshew. But it seems to me they broke the seal on Foles two weeks ago, and it's kind of musty, to be honest with you. And I wonder if they didn't, Eric Stoner mentioned this to me, and he said, I think the Jaguars ruined their chances to trade away Nick Foles. And as a result, they could have traded him, gotten something out of it, and they could have gone with a different quarterback. Now they're stuck with a big money player who's just not very good. What do you think of that, Tom?
I think Stoner's absolutely right. And it gives me a chance to bring up perhaps my favorite quote from all of football Twitter this past week. And it comes from the great Sigmund Bloom, who said that Stoner and Waldman are the football writers that football writers read, like that phrase, the musicians that musicians listen to. He said, you and Stoner were the guys that football writers read because you always have such great insight. And Stoner's right there, because what's happened now is they've played themselves into a situation where nobody's going to want to take Foles, because we've seen what he's done this year. It's like you said, it's sort of rubbed some of the sheen off that. And Gardner Minshew looked like he could be the future. And so if you're a team that's going to deal with Jacksonville to acquire Foles, you're not paying top dollar because you know that you're acquiring a guy that might be sitting on the bench next year. And so I think that if they had just shut Foles down, they might have had a better chance to sort of get more in return from him if they try to move on from him this past offseason. So I think that's a very good point. The only sort of flip side to that is the last time we talked, I said that, Foles coming back might be great for Minshew because it'll give him sort of that chance to rest, reload, and sort of catch his breath as a rookie would sometimes help. Maybe that would play into effect here, but I think the overall point is Jacksonville might have missed a window.
Yeah, I think they did. And I think that it is unfortunate, and part of it too is this is a team that seems like it's sinking, that it's kind of a mediocre team, maybe even a bad team. You watch Leonard Fournette at the sideline just at the end of last week's game, and he was away from everybody, just taking a knee as people were congratulating themselves. He's been upset. He's kind of called people, he's kind of sought the advice of somebody like Marcus Allen, who he met during his recruiting visits to schools. This is a guy that's worked pretty hard, and after kind of adding some weight last year and it not working out for him and having the repeated foot and ankle injuries, you wondered how much of this guy's is kind of a ticking time bomb from a health standpoint. But he did enough this offseason that maybe the ticking time bomb with the foot and ankle still there, but he's maximized every opportunity that he can get. And this is a really good football player on a team that has a chance to be good, but its quarterback has to play better. And Nick Foles really did not look good in the pocket. He didn't look good under pressure. I think Minshew's played better in both those situations. Foles went to his favorite, which was, Conley. To me, as much as Conley is a talented veteran in terms of physical talent, he reminds me of a guy like Dante Moncrief, which is a no-fly list type of player, a guy who just, and when you have DJ Chark and you're not trying to get established rapport with him early, kind of worries me about him. I just think Foles is in a different place, and that place isn't for starters.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. So, okay. Let's talk about this guy, because Mark, you wrote a fun article today that came out yesterday and had a funny idea about a pickup line, and then related that to Anthony Gordon, the Washington State quarterback. You've talked about that you like him. He intrigues you, even though his game is ugly. I've talked about him on Ross Tucker, liking his game as well. What is it about Anthony Gordon that you like?
Yeah, and I'm going to take a time out here because I've been chomping at the bit to talk about this guy. Because when I reached out to you, I said I have a bold comparison, and I'm going to get to that in a second. And I hate comparisons. I hate that I'm even going to go down this road, but I think it's worthwhile. But to set the premise, the piece, I talk about a pickup line that I actually heard somebody use when I was in college. Now, Wesleyan University, it's a different place, but a friend of a friend was approached by a guy at a house party, and he said to her, "You're ugly, but you intrigue me." And that's how I felt sort of starting to watch Anthony Gordon, because the footwork can be messy. The drops can be sloppy. The mechanics can be jerky at times. It took me a while. It took me into like the second game of watching him to really figure out the upper body torque that he generates. It's awkward. It works, but it was just like, this doesn't seem to be the kind of guy that you would put on in terms of teaching tape. But the more I studied him, the more that this other tweet from another good football writer, Justice Mosqueda, came to mind, because he wrote, when Mahomes was coming along, he wrote something, a tweet to the effect of, the guys that grew up idolizing Montana, like the Tom Brady's of the world, they're phasing out. And the guys that grew up idolizing Brett Favre, like a Patrick Mahomes, they're coming into the league. And we're going to be blessed as football fans watching these guys, because they're going to be more gunslinger types. They're going to be more aggressive in the passing game. They're going to take risks with the football. And it's going to make for a more enjoyable product to watch. That's what we have here with Gordon, but it's different. Because the comparison I have, believe it or not, is Patrick Mahomes. Because if you're a college kid playing the game right now, who do you want to model your game after? It's Patrick Mahomes. And I'm not saying that Anthony Gordon is the next Mahomes or that he has the same sort of talent level or anything like that. But when you watch him play, he makes some audacious types of throws with the football. He tries no-look throws. He tries those things that we see Mahomes doing every single week. He's modeling his game after Patrick Mahomes. And what's more amazing is he's an efficient quarterback. I mean, last week, 50 of 70 for like 600 yards. I mean, he's running an offense that people deride, the air raid. It doesn't teach you. Look at what Gardner Minshew was able to do. Like, he's running full field progression reads, but he has that understanding of underneath coverage and zone defenders. He understands leverage. The touchdown that I highlighted in the piece for the RSP against Northern Colorado, where he sees that linebacker buzz out, so he throws it behind him on the slant route to throw the guy open in the end zone for the touchdown. That's advanced stuff, but it's the kind of audacious stuff we expect from Mahomes. And so we're going to get kids like Gordon and others that model their game after Patrick Mahomes coming into the league, and it's going to be great to see. But I'm extremely intrigued by him. He might be my quarterback binky in this class. I hope to God he gets a Senior Bowl invite, because I would love to see him in person. I can't wait to watch more of this kid.
Yeah. And that's a great breakdown of Gordon. And I love the comparison because, to be honest with you, I saw the same thing with him. And it was crazy because he's one of my highest scoring guys so far from, my first 2 to 3 looks at quarterbacks. And the thing about him is, he holds the secondary well with his eyes until the last moment as a manipulator. And I think Mike Leach recognizes this in quarterbacks because Gardner Minshew did the same things in college. He has a sudden release with the really effective throwing platforms from a variety that, whereas say the Broncos and John Elway thought they were getting that in Drew Lock. To me, Drew Lock is like, I put it this way in the RSP, and I had a longer opportunity to give an explanation, but let's just put it this way. There are 2 saxophonists whose first name are Kenny and their last ones are G. Yep. Last one have the first initial G. One is just a really schlock kind of like sentimental, syrupy musician who really has a limited amount of skill and makes billions of dollars now. The other is one who is an unbelievable jazz musician and one of the greatest saxophone players on the planet. Drew Lock is kind of the Kenny G to the real deal that Patrick Mahomes is. Anthony Gordon's more in that neighborhood than he is in Drew Lock's neighborhood. Yeah. He's aware of checkdowns. He reads the width and length of the field. He has really good field maneuver in the pocket away from pressure, and he can deliver in rhythm, even though he doesn't have that, like you said, the picture perfect feet. And I love how you talked about what Mosqueda said with Patrick Mahomes and Brett Favre and the type of comparisons that are there. And because it goes right in line with the astute thought that John Harbaugh had with Lamar Jackson, that someday all these kids are going to be trying to play like him, and they're going to all kind of come up with him as the influence. And so it only makes sense that Favre would be that guy. So yeah, I love the comp. I'm glad that we got to talk about it.
Yeah, I know, because when I reached out to you at the end of last week, I didn't share the Mahomes comp with you. I just said I had a bold comparison, but I feel a little bit better about it that you saw the same thing, because I was like, am I just out on the limb here? Like, am I going to sound like a fool? It's why I didn't put it in the article. I was sort of saving it for this because I wanted to at least explain it a bit more. But I really like this kid.
Yeah. Yeah. He has a feel for the game that's extremely strong. Yeah. And it's like, and to me, the more we're doing this, and we talk about this a lot, I talk about it a lot with Russ Landy, the longer I'm studying quarterbacks, the more I'm getting to the feel like that there's guys who could start for a little while and you may not be happy with them, but the team's going to act like they're franchise caliber quarterbacks. And then there are guys who have a feel for the game. And depending on how good their athletic and technical acumen can be on the field, they either range to being top franchise guys or long-term starters, or, there's something else that undermines them. But I'd rather go with the guy who has that great feel for when the bullets are flying and understands how to manage a game and understands how to manage a pocket, and play fast and think fast in a way where it's not frenetic. And I think he has that. And so to me, there's those guys and there's everybody else, even if everybody else is rated as a top quarterback.
Yeah. No, I think the more we study it, the more that line of thinking makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just becomes, because we get too wrapped up in the theoretical and the technical. And when it comes down to it, as some of the better scouts have said long ago, is that once those guys, there's lots of guys in practice who look great that you can explain their game on paper and it's just fantastic. Then the lights come on and they're a whole different player. Yeah. And sometimes it's the opposite, so I'd rather have the opposite. So speaking of guys who do check all the boxes, except for one now, that's Tua Tagovailoa, who had the hip injury. Does that hurt his draft stock to you?
I think in a sense it might narrow like the teams that will be willing to draft him early. He had injury concerns going into this hip injury because he had the high ankle sprain, which required surgery. He had some lower body injuries before that. So I think teams were going to have to sort of put him through the medical checklist. I still think he's a first-round quarterback because how could you not, even if you are worried about the medicals, the talent is there. And the more we hear about the hip injury and the fact that he will be throwing this spring and he might even be ready for camp next year, it might ease some concerns. But I think if you're a team like, say, Cincinnati that needs somebody to start right away, or a team that's looking for somebody to come in and start day one, it might make it a little bit tougher to draft him. But I don't think it really hurts his overall stock. I think he's still a first-round guy that will probably come off the board in the top 10, which – even if he hadn't gotten hurt, he might have slid a little bit because of the rise of Joe Burrow. So I think in a long-winded way of saying this, I don't think it's hurt it too much.
Yeah. I don't think it's hurt it much, except for the teams that you mentioned. And those teams, I don't think really get it in terms of how to develop a quarterback. And there are teams that just feel like, listen, we've spent a lot of money. And for us, a lot of money is that we're not sending, we don't have our scouts in a tractor trailer off the side of the building because that's what we can afford with the facility. And we make them eat Waffle House all day long, right. And so as a result of that, this is a type of situation that this is a guy that you should rest anyway. I think he has some pretty good skills in terms of being able to read leverage. But there are some little bit of flaws in his game that could be helped with him being able to just kind of be in and out of lineups, playing a little bit sporadically. And I think if you did that with him, the kind of the old school way of developing a quarterback, I think he can be really, really good in this league. But I think the injury will give teams kind of a chance to maybe take a slower approach with him. And I hope that, I think this is ultimately actually good for his development, even if his draft stock slips from being top 10 to being more top 15, top 20.
Yeah, I think that's a great way. And this could end up being the best thing that happened to him, believe it or not. Because if he falls to a team and that's like teens to 20s range, that it's probably a smarter franchise, it could really pan out for him. And I'll even go out there and say this. If he falls to New England, I'm just going to say, could be special.
Yeah, I understand, and certainly, I agree with you that there's
there's a team like or New Orleans. Like there's another situation where maybe they decide Breeze hangs it up or whatever, or he doesn't. They got one more year with him, but they get a chance to bring him along slowly into it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so here's the hot button question of the day. Who's the fan base with the most unrealistic expectations about its team and players?
The Chicago Bears. Can I just say the Chicago Bears? Because I cover Mitch Trubisky for Pro Football Weekly on a week in to week out basis. And it has been amazing to see the narrative around Mitchell Trubisky, who I think most people have decided it's time to at least explore other options in 2020 at the quarterback position for Chicago. But there are those in that fan base that believe that it's all Matt Nagy's fault and they need to run a different offense, that they need to fix the offensive line, even when he's kept clean, his numbers are, shall we say, putrid, or that they need to get better tight ends around him, even though this year they've had tight ends in and out of the lineup that, they're not great, but he's still got guys to throw to. And so the shift in narrative around him is spectacular. And even though I'll point out that, you think he should run a West Coast system like Kyle Shanahan's, what to date has shown you he can run that offense, given that he's in a West Coast offense now under Matt Nagy, who's a West Coast disciple? Or this idea that, again, if he's kept clean, he's going to be great, even though the numbers under pressure or pressured are basically the same, i.e. they're all bad. Like, I don't get it. But there are those out there that still stick by this guy. I don't get it.
Yeah, well, I can certainly understand your answer for the Bears, because I think there's really one true answer to this. All of you fan bases are unrealistic about your teams. The only one that I'd say that may not be is Atlanta's, because there are no fans of Atlanta football down here. You're all from somewhere else now. The ones that I do find, I have to look with a microscope to find you. It's crazy. Well, it's not that bad in Atlanta, but that's my exaggeration of it. The team, though, that I would pick that just is on my mind right now is the Dallas Cowboys. And it's just because when the Dallas Cowboys fans, the unrealistic fans that I see on Twitter the most often are the unrealistic Dallas Cowboy fans. The ones who think that Ezekiel Elliott's lost something, that Dak Prescott's a bad quarterback, that, everything's going wrong because the team has a winning record and they lose to a top team in the rain away. Yeah. That whenever Amari Cooper has a bad day, suddenly it's like, what's wrong with the entire team? Jerry Jones is that way. He's a reactive owner. Yeah. There's a lot of things that he does well, but he is a reactive owner, and his city is a reactive city as a result. It's kind of like, that's the thing. I just think that this is a team that can be a winning team, and they still think that half their players are stink, or there's some sort of trouble with them. And I just watch from afar and just kind of shake my head. I mean, I got a question from a fan today or last night about, is Ezekiel Elliott losing his top speed? And I answered the question, and I have to admit, I mean, like I said, listen, I haven't studied the line. I haven't studied, it could be those things, but I'm prefacing this with how well Ezekiel Elliott's playing statistically. And from what I've seen, nothing's really changed. And I get someone following up with me who's like, and I could see where he thought maybe I was being defensive. If anything, I thought I was taking the offensive on Cowboys fans. Right. But, he was like, you didn't really answer the question, about him being, explosive or not. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I said he hasn't changed. It hasn't looked like his game's changed much at all. So I don't know. It kind of makes me laugh. I mean, the number one answer for real for this season might be Cleveland Browns fans if you look at what their expectations were from August to right now. But maybe the media helped out that as well. So we're all, when it comes to fandom, I think we're all just like completely out of our minds when it comes to our teams. Yeah. And thank goodness they aren't our families. That's all I'll say. Yeah. So, who's a rookie in the NFL right now who's performing well, and they're under the national radar? They're not getting a lot of pub.
I'm going to sound like a broken record at this point because I wrote about him last week over at Football Guys. I'm going to sound like a blatant homer, and I don't care. It's Jacoby Myers, the undrafted free agent for the New England Patriots. Because to see his transition to the wide receiver position, to see him force his way into the Tom Brady circle of trust, to see him become a third down target for this team. And part of it is, look, they're banged up at the wide receiver spot and teams are now double covering Edelman because that's what you would do. But he has a feel for the wide receiver position that has gleamed in part from his previous background as a quarterback. He knows how important the timing is on route concepts. He knows he needs to be where he needs to be. Otherwise, Tom Brady is going to scan past him in the progression. He has the ability to make catches, make runs after the catch. That catch and run he had against Dallas on the crossing route was incredible. He broke multiple tackles on that play. There's a reason Patriots fans are optimistic about this offense down the stretch, even though it has looked bad in recent weeks. And it's because guys of like N'Keal Harry and Jacoby Myers who are growing before our eyes. It's Jacoby Myers for me.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I'm going to roll with another receiver as much as I'd like to talk about a guy out of Atlanta here who's their third string running back, Kadri Ollison, who I'm really taking a shine to since I watched him at Pitt even. But like, I'm going to mention Kelvin Harmon out of Washington. I think Kelvin Harmon, while he hasn't played as well as Jacoby Myers, watching him go up and win the ball, make some difficult plays on difficult targets or come very close to doing so. This is a guy that I think is only going to get better and better. I thought he was, I rated him as my 10th receiver on the board last year. I thought he was, and I had him graded as a borderline starter. He was literally, you could have rounded up and I would have given him a starter grade, an immediate starter grade. And he's essentially become an immediate, a starter year one. This is someone that doesn't have great speed, but he wins the ball's his. If the ball's near him, it's going to, he's going to clamp down on it. And it's just, or make a valiant attempt in a way that I don't think anybody else has a chance of catching it either if he can't catch it. He owns the boundary. He's still quick enough to be able to get separation, downfield. He's just a sturdy, reliable receiver who I think is going to grow into a really nice role, complementing, Terry McLaurin, who's played extremely strong football. And I think that the Washington, from a receiver standpoint, has some promise here for a team that's, been struggling for years.
Yeah. And I actually did a mock draft where the Patriots drafted him in the first round, believe it or not. I loved him coming out. So I'm not surprised.
I can believe it.
Yeah. I thought he would have been a great fit in New England, but I think you're exactly right with him.
Yeah, Josh Norman calls him Baby Huey, and just for the immense promise this guy has. And he came to Josh Norman in the beginning of the year and said, "How do I be great in this league? Help me, help me as from your perspective, how I can beat people like you. Like, what do I do?" And I'm sure there's some Washington fans and other fans who are like, "Well, Josh Norman gets beat all the time," but again, he's a veteran who can help this kid out. So, speaking of quarterbacks, which we weren't really talking about, but I'm not very good at segues. Who would you rather have at quarterback for one game with the Lions? Joe Callahan, Taron Christian, or former tight end Logan Thomas if Jeff Driscoll can't go?
That's a fascinating one. The Thomas pick intrigues me. There's that word again. But I'm going to say Taron Christian because when I studied him at South Dakota State, I saw potential there. I love the way he handled the pocket. Certainly an athletic quarterback. I loved some of what he was able to do in terms of manipulating defenders. He had some red zone throws his junior year, which I broke down on film, which, really showed the ability and the understanding of a quarterback to manipulate defenders in the secondary and the third level of the defense and to sort of understand the concept and why he was doing it. And you could tell in a sense, sometimes you see that from quarterbacks where they're not just doing it because they're told to do it. They know why. They have to move a guy with their eyes. They have to freeze a safety in the middle of the field. And so that's who I would pick. I mean, if you're a Lions fan, if you're a football fan, you get Trubisky and Jeff Driscoll or David Blau on Thursday. It's not the best way to start your holiday, my friend. So I'd rather see Terry Christian in there.
I can see that, and I like the idea, and also just from an organizational perspective, you can get this guy on the cheap. You can see what he has to offer under a big game. If he plays pretty well, or you see on tape some of the things, Mark, that you just highlighted about him, and it is translating to the NFL game, even though 1 week in and you're running the basic offense with him. Why not?
Right.
Why not? I mean, Matthew Stafford, second year in a row with broken bones in his back. Tough dude, great, very good quarterback. But somebody that, you're going to have to find a replacement at some point. Why not see if you can hit on the lottery pick and get somebody cheap rather than go with Logan Thomas, who what he is, which is a converted quarterback to a tight end. Why are you going to pull his quarterbacking game out of mothballs for one week when you have a chance to have kind of a tryout here? Because it's not like, because he knows the offense better from a tight end position that somehow that's going to translate and give him the extra edge. I mean, that sounds great in theory, but in reality, there's a reason why he's playing tight end in this league. Right. So, go with a guy that you get a chance to evaluate. Speaking of a guy who we've evaluated often, and I just wonder this as I watch Josh Allen throughout the year, is he turning a corner, or is he tagging along with an offense that's turning the corner?
I almost want to say both. Like, in a certain sense, I see that Josh Allen has made some strides. And I think it was Robert Myers, Robert Mays, who wrote a piece about Josh Allen and the quarterback evaluation process. And Allen himself admitted that there are some throws he's making this year, some throws from the pocket with touch, with timing, with rhythm that you didn't see. And he even admitted, I couldn't make that throw a year ago. I think if you look at some of the stuff that Brian Daboll has done with him, he's turned him into a timing rhythm quarterback, which I think we talked about in one of the first installments of this show where we were surprised. And so I think he has sort of turned the corner. I think he is getting better, but I think this offense has gotten better as well. And part of it is now you're getting an expanded repertoire of what Josh Allen is able to do. So it opens up the playbook more so you can do more things, which raises the level of play from the offensive players around him and the offense in general. And so I think both have turned the corner. The one I'm more surprised by, obviously, is Josh Allen's growth, because if you would have told me, this time 2 years ago that he'd be a time and rhythm-based passer, I would have said you were crazy. There's no way that kid is going to learn time and rhythm and touch in the NFL, but he has.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it is a combination of both answers. I mean, this is a team that's, has a strong defense, or has the makings of a strong defense. They're strong up front, along in the trenches where you need them to be. They have good cornerbacks. They have an offensive line that's young and promising. They certainly are being able to run the ball because, listen, Devin Singletary is a very, very good conceptual player, very good technically sound player. He's not a great athlete. And the fact that this guy is churning out yards for you at the rate he is, a lot of credit goes to that offensive line. This is a team that is really, kind of bolstering Josh Allen's ability to maximize his game. But I agree with you that from the timing aspect, things are getting better. I'd say he's peeking around the corner, and occasionally he bumps into that corner as he goes to see what more is there. And he kind of has to shake it off a little bit, but he's a big kid who can move okay. And, a few bumps and bruises here and there, he's going to shake off. I don't think it's going to hurt him. And I think he is coming along. So I'm optimistic about the Bills. I'm optimistic about Josh Allen. I just think that it's going to take him a little bit longer than it might take some of the other players that we've seen from a statistical standpoint for it to reflect in his game.
Yeah.
So speaking of guys who we talked about earlier this year, and specifically you talked about in a fine article about Baker or Chef, the concept of Baker or Chef. At first, Kirk Cousins looked like a busboy, to begin the begin the year. Maybe he was spilling coffee over customers and his own, and burning his own coworkers, as he was walking around with it. But suddenly, after the little kiss and make up with Diggs and with Thielen, Kirk Cousins is, playing extremely well. Is he still a Baker to you? Does that matter? Or is he changed? Or is it possible that he's changed his game?
I think he's still a Baker, but he's chef curious. Okay. He's taken some classes at the local community college. He's chef curious because he's had some moments this year where he showed you the ability.
Is it affiliated with Wesleyan by any chance?
Of course it is. I told you that place was different.
Okay.
But he's had some moments where he's sort of expanded his thought process as a passer. The bulk of what they do, it's still they want to show run and run play action and do some stuff when he's going by the book. But the touchdown to Rudolph against Dallas, for example, where he sort of creates and, throws him open in the back of the end zone, and moments like that where you see like, okay, he's more comfortable in this offense, and so he's feeling a bit more confident. So he's expanding the horizons of what he expects himself to be able to do as a quarterback. And it's been great to see. So I think he is still a Baker, but some chef curiosity sprinkled in this season.
Okay. I can see that. I definitely think he's still a baker. I just think that they've upgraded the bakery and he's learned some recipes that require, high-end pastry chef type of work on a level where maybe they brought in some pastry chefs in there and he's able to mimic some of that. I mean, when you're able to create, part of it too is, listen, they have a dynamic screen game. They have a dynamic play action bootleg rollout game. And when you can roll out the opposite direction of the throw and you can commit throwbacks, or you get lots of time to be able to scan the field a little bit, it's going to look a little bit fancier than it might if you were just strictly doing it all from the pocket. So I think they understand that this is a guy that needs a lot of room. You got to, so that he has that big table to spread all that flour on and doesn't get all the other things messed up with it. And then he can kind of, work with the dough in that open space. And I think that that's what they're doing with him. It's working out well. And a lot of this is the function of a fantastic running game, a really strong play action game, and receivers that anyone would be envious to have. Yeah. Even though one of them has been hurt and about to come back.
Right.
So speaking of like the envy of the league and guy we've talked about often here, let's break it down, because this could be the game of the year. I mean, I know that we had the potential game of the year with the Ravens and Patriots, but that didn't end quite all that well. So, and I think, as we've talked about, Bill's probably going to have his opportunity for revenge, but it's Lamar Jackson versus the 49ers. How do you think this plays out in terms of Lamar versus the 49ers defense? Yeah,
I know people have tried to, and I've actually been wrapping my mind around it again. Like, how do you stop what Lamar and the Ravens are doing? Because they're so hard to game plan for, because they will use some different personnel packages. Like, Monday night when they come out with 3 tight ends, 2 receivers, and they go 4 verticals against you. I mean, they're doing different things. Greg Roman deserves a ton of credit. John Harbaugh deserves a ton of credit for how they've sort of bought into, what Lamar Jackson is as a quarterback, which is not a wide receiver or slot receiver or whatever. He's a very good pocket passer to go along with what he brings to the table. And so trying to stop them is hard because they make you incorrect no matter what you do. You could go light like the Chargers did against him last year in the divisional round, and maybe it worked then, but he's a different quarterback now. That was a wild card, excuse me, but he's a different quarterback now. You can go heavy. Bill tried 5 linebackers at times. It doesn't matter. They have the ability up front to beat you up. Losing their center might hurt, so I'm curious to see how that plays in. But now you get a defense that can get after you, and Saleh deserves a ton of credit for how he's got this defense to play. Fred Warner is a fantastic talent at the middle linebacker spot. He was an overhand defender. I think, trying to think about it schematically, they're going to try to stay in base. They're going to try to sort of get pressure with D Ford and Armstead and Bosa off the edge. but he's just a different talent to prepare for. The Patriots use their best athlete at times, Jonathan Jones, a 4-3 type guy, twitchy athlete, to spy him, and it still didn't work. And I think that sort of says it all about what the Baltimore Ravens can do.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a lower scoring game. And I think a lot of it is if you watch how the 49ers played against Kyler Murray, they were very good at being able to use their interior defensive line to kind of hold up the interior offensive line in pass protection and just kind of watch and wait and then be able to shed and pursue and limit Kyler Murray from big gains out of the pocket as the edge rushers kind of forced him to work inside and work past them and try and work under and then to the outside. And they were able to turn and run and catch him. But Kyler Murray, to me, is a borderline mobile NFL quarterback in the way people see him. Like, people see him and they say, ooh, he's a big play machine with his legs. And I kind of see him as, yes, that technically, yes, you're correct. He can be, but I think that he's a little bit slower than people realize when it comes to that. And really athletic interior defensive linemen have been able to run him down if he doesn't have the perfect angle to be able to take on them. And Lamar Jackson, though, is different than Kyler Murray.
Yeah.
And I think that we're going to see that where he's going to make some bigger play runs, but he's going to have to run the ball more to win this game, or he's going to have to win in the deep game and exploit deep plays that he hasn't done as consistently and against a tougher defense. So I think what we're going to see here is kind of more of a boom bust day from Lamar Jackson, meaning that he's going to hit some big plays, but it may not be often enough for them to just pull away and win this game. This is going to be a highly contested contest where, he may hit one difference-making run, one difference-making throw for them to win this game, or it may be he's stopped on a difference-making run or stopped on a difference-making throw in a manner that, they lose a tight one. So to me, this is the most intriguing game. And I think that goes down to the opposite side, because now we have, you have the athletic quarterback with the athletic defense. And now you have the quarterback who prefers to play from the pocket or be able to roll out a bit or two and throw on the move, but he's not a runner, and he's he's kind of a nervous guy at times, playing against a defense that loves to blitz. So how do we look at Jimmy Garoppolo versus the Ravens defense? How does this play out?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about this one, because we got a sort of preview of that when the Patriots played against the Ravens, because Garoppolo and Brady are similar quarterbacks in a sense, where they like to get the ball out of their hands quickly. I mean, you look at time in the pocket right now, from snap to throw, Garoppolo is second in the league, just 2.41 seconds from snap to throw. And then right behind him is Tom Brady at 2.5. They're both in the top 5 in that category. And so you would think that a team, that blitzes a ton, that's not going to have that kind of effect, given these guys like to get the ball out of their hands quickly. But it certainly impacted the Patriots passing game. It certainly slowed down them at times. And when they went to their tempo approach, you saw them start to have success. So I'm curious to see, does Kyle Shanahan take a page from Josh McDaniels' playbook and try to go tempo to try to sort of get them to slow up that pass rush a bit, gas those defensive linemen up front a bit, slow down that blitz attack as guys get to be winded. And then now you've got a slower blitz coming, and Garoppolo's got that quick release, the quick time to throw. That might be the way that they go. So that's what I'll be watching for. It's a shame this is a 1:00 game. I'd like to see this be a primetime game so we could all sort of focus on it. But yeah, the schematic elements of this one are huge on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I think Garoppolo's going to struggle, to be honest.
Really?
I think this is going to be one of those games where the blitz is going to come. I think they're going to be able to shut down the run early enough to where, with the pressure coming, that Garoppolo is going to get induced into making mistakes. And I think this is going to be one of those ball games where maybe the winning team wins by 3, 6, 9 points, and it feels like that there's a bigger gulf than what that point differential really is. And I think what's going to happen is that Baltimore is going to make those plays. Marcus Peters is playing terrific football right now. The way that they're using him, they're allowing him to play to his strengths. And he's being aggressive and winning. And I think with Jimmy Garoppolo, who, this is a situation where I think Peters is going to have an interception in this game. I think, we could see Humphreys probably have an interception in this game. I think this is going to be like a 3 interception game for Jimmy Garoppolo. And I don't think it's going to be pretty for either quarterback. But I think Lamar's going to come out of this looking a little bit better. And it'll be, a defensive struggle, a rare defensive struggle in this league. And I think that's what we're going to see this weekend. Yeah. We're still on the quarterback thought. And, about 6 weeks ago or so, I was watching Phillip Rivers and I thought he lost something. I thought that something's a little bit gone with his game. And I'm just wondering where you stand on Phillip Rivers. Do you think that he's lost anything? And I'm starting to think, as I've asked this question, that I've asked you this question before.
No, you haven't. I think it's the first time we've talked about Phillip Rivers. And I do think he has lost something. I think if you watch him on film, velocity and placement seem to be an issue for him right now. I'd say more placement than velocity. I mean, he still has a very good arm, but the placement isn't where it needs to be. So that's certainly hurt them. You look at, his numbers against pressure. I remember a piece I wrote last year for the RSP was talking about how he handled the blitz and how well he handled the blitz and how confident he was, even when he knows he was going to get a free rusher in his face, that I know where I can go with the football and I can put it where it needs to be. And I'll take the hit because that's what the quarterback does, and I'll stand tall and deliver. This year, the numbers against pressure, they're certainly not what they were last year. They're kind of more mid to lower tier. I mean, you look at his adjusted completion percentage, just 62.6 against pressure. I mean, that's 16th in the league right now. That's down there with like Andy Dalton. And so that's where there's been a drop off as well. And so you put that together and he's lost something. He's not the quarterback he was last year. He's not the quarterback he was a couple of years ago. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a collapse of him under pressure, some dips in placement and velocity. And that's led to some really bad games the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think that the most notable thing for me that I've seen with him is that in the past, as gangly looking as he is as a player, and it seems like that, he's like Bernie Kosar's younger brother in terms of the way that he moves around. He's a type of guy that's still on the move with bodies hanging off of him, that he could get the ball to a receiver and he could deliver it pinpoint, and that he had enough velocity on throws to be able to get there. It wasn't like he had great velocity, but he had good enough, and he had surprisingly good velocity from off-platform types of throws. It seems like from the beginning of this year, he has not been able to make those off-platform plays that really made a difference in his game, and as a result of that, he doesn't have that added element of when pressure comes, that he can kind of lean on his toughness and lean on his inventiveness to be able to find a receiver. And with that gone, he's kind of an average quarterback at best. Yeah. And I feel like that we're seeing that. And then as a result, because he's an aggressive player, he makes aggressive throws now that maybe he shouldn't. And maybe it's because he senses himself that he's having to lean on other parts of his game that aren't quite as strong, because he's missing other aspects that he used to leverage in a way that were to his advantage and surprise teams, So who's a coach who's not in the league that you'd like to see back in the league, if we're going to talk about, recycling coaches, which is a common theme in the NFL?
Yeah, there are a couple of names you could go with. I'll go with Mike Martz. Just because the sort of offensive innovations that he brought to the table, and it wasn't so much that it was totally revolutionary. I mean, the idea of getting your running back involved in the passing game, the idea of using your running back as a slot receiver, like that wasn't, out of nowhere. I mean, Bill Walsh was doing things like that before him, and people were doing that before Bill Walsh. But, the way he sort of was able to carve out a role for Marshall Faulk and to make him obviously an incredibly talented running back and football player, but to sort of make him into what Marshall Faulk became coming out of San Diego State, I thought was visionary in a sense. I thought the tempo, the designs, the way they attacked defenses, the way that teams are running offenses now, a lot of that is derived from what Martz was doing. And so he's a guy, if you could picture Martz with a guy like Patrick Mahomes or even a Lamar Jackson or an Anthony Gordon, who we were talking about, I think you would see some offenses that will put up a ton of points. And so, yeah, I'll say Mike Martz.
I love that answer. That's a terrific answer. I'm gonna conjure up Eric Stoner because he was telling me this last night, and it made me think of the question, and I'm going to answer on his behalf. But before I do, I would say my real answer, if he were healthy enough, and unfortunately he's not, is Marty Schottenheimer. I would say I would love to see Marty Schottenheimer back, because not only is it because he's the old school pound it down your throat, and you're seeing that's being summoned a little bit by John Gruden in terms of what he does with his offense. But in addition to that, he's known, in a way, maybe not in the media, but known for developing a quarterback or two. And Drew Brees credited Marty Schottenheimer for that. And I think in today's era, we need somebody who has some patience and who knows how to work with a quarterback by taking him on and off the field without the quarterback feeling jerked around and losing his confidence. And I think that someone with that kind of experience, with his team building skills, the way they play defense, the toughness with their offenses, he'd be it. But the quick answer for Eric Stoner on his behalf, and this is an odd one, Marvin Lewis. He was saying, I would like Marvin Lewis to go to the Jaguars. And I was like, well, why? And he said he got a raw deal in Cincinnati. If you think about how cheap Cincinnati is, you think about, what he did for all those years in Cincinnati to keep them a competitive team. And they were competitive teams. They didn't have a great quarterback. They didn't perform well in the playoffs, but they got to the playoffs. They had strong defensive lines. They had, hard hitting, intense players. They had talented offenses with some really good receivers. They could run the ball. They played with balance. This was a team that was liable to go off on you any given week. And maybe they seemed like underachievers, but maybe the real answer is that they were overachievers, kind of like, if you had, imagine a coach who could somehow battle off Daniel Snyder and actually, field 10-6, 9-7 teams year after year in Washington. I think that's basically what Marvin Lewis did with maybe a quietly worse ownership. So I can understand the logic behind that as a desire to get a guy. So let's talk, talking about maybe underrated guys. Who's a former football player, not talked about often, but you think maybe had a Hall of Fame caliber career or talent at least? Maybe not a career, but at least Hall of Fame caliber talent, even if he's not in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many names you could list here. I mean, I was in prepping for this show, I was looking through a list, a couple of different places to go through names, and guys like Warwick Dunn and Hines Ward, who are tremendous football players. But I'm going to say Randall Cunningham. And as a kid growing up, playing the position, watching football. And yeah, I was in that Justice Mosqueda thought of guys that modeled their games after Joe Montana being phased out. I was one. I wore 16 playing Pop Warner after Joe Montana. I'm 7 months older than Tom Brady. So of course that was the guy that I idolized my game around and thought that I could be. But during that time frame, if there was a guy that I was going to stop and just watch, it was Randall Cunningham. Tremendous talent. I thought that obviously years ahead of his time, if you could have Randall Cunningham in the league now, he might be that sort of blend of Mahomes and Lamar Jackson with, the athleticism, the ability as a runner, but also the ability as a passer with velocity and an incredible arms talent. And so, he's a guy whose talent was immense, years ahead of his time. If he had played in the league now, he'd probably have, if he get the buy-in from an organization, he'd have the ability to be a Hall of Famer. And so I'll say Randall Cunningham.
Yeah, that's a great answer. He was he was just a scintillating player to watch. And I've got to check off basically 3 boxes that that are part of the RSP quick game quota. So this is my excuse to be able to do that. Obviously I could mention Steve McNair. He's one of my favorite players. We've talked about him in the past of how good he is and what he could have been here. Certainly Jim McMahon is a fun player, but I don't think he got a chance to be the type of player he would have been in a different system. And then, and then I would add in a guy like, Ernest Biner is a guy who I really enjoyed watching. But if there's someone that really stood out to me whose career got cut short, and the NFL Network or NFL Films just recently did something on him and talked about him as kind of a hidden legend. And I watched that, and I had all the memories came back of watching him when I was about 10 years old, and just had moved to Atlanta. And he was a fantastic talent. And I'm not talking about William Andrews, as much as I really loved him too. That's another guy a box should be checked there. And I could go on about him, and maybe he's even the better answer. But I'm going to roll with Billy Sims. Ooh. When I watched Billy Sims at Oklahoma, Billy Sims to me was kind of like Ezekiel Elliott with more speed. He was a guy who could, he could run between the tackles. He had terrific skill after contact. He had great moves. He could make you miss in ways that were just, almost in Barry Sanders' neighborhood. But he also had the power and the speed in his game. And watching him in Detroit early in his career, adding the receiving element to his game, which was just fantastic. He was a terrific receiver. He turned that team into a playoff contender. I mean, he was unbelievable in terms of tight quarters running, in terms of being able, once he got in the open field, it was over. He played with an abandon that would have held up in today's game. He would have been, you think of Adrian Peterson right now and the way that he plays, and people just go, wow, just the way he's so ferocious, that he's more ferocious than the young guys in the way that he plays and the way that he attacks defenses. I think Adrian Peterson basically was one of the running backs held over from the 1980s who played in that kind of level. And Billy Sims was just a phenomenal player who only got to play 4 years. And he suffered a knee injury where multiple knee ligaments basically forced him out of the game after 4 years. I think he easily would have been a Hall of Fame player if he was able to stay healthy throughout his career.
That's a perfect answer. Yeah, you summed it up incredibly well. Yeah, great job there. But yeah, Sims is a great answer here.
All right. So, going from one Thanksgiving special, which is always the Lions and any Lions personnel, to another, we'll cap this off with what your favorite Thanksgiving leftover is, since we're about to get on that day.
First of all, the leftovers are the best part of the whole Thanksgiving weekend experience, because like the cooked meal when it's warm, like it's okay, it's all right, and I can say that because I'm the guy that does it here. But the leftovers are the best, and for me, and I mentioned this the last quick game, we do two different stuffings. Okay, yeah. Most everybody eats the one from my wife's side of the family, which is, you use the giblets and you grind the meat into it. You've got raisins, you've got water chestnuts. It's very different. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but everybody else loves it, so we make it. But I make the sort of old school North End Italian sausage stuff, in which as soon as we stop recording this, I'm going to go upstairs and start once I get the kids from school. And that is what is my favorite sort of Thanksgiving leftover. And I remember as a kid, and I know my parents listen to this, are going to be revulsed when I tell this story, but I would be like picking it out of the fridge the next day and just like picking pieces of sausage out cold or taking spoonfuls out cold and eating it. That's my favorite part, the leftover Italian sausage stuffing.
See, I don't find anything revolting about anything that you just described there. But so now. I don't know, so I don't know. Maybe you've just, met another uncouth individual. So, but yeah, I would joke that that a cat I had for the longest time, his favorite thing was we made a spinach casserole, and for some reason he liked this creamed spinach thing. And I honestly think he'd get buzzed from it, because one day as a kitten, we actually heard the refrigerator door open after we had Thanksgiving, and all of a sudden we heard like a tray sliding out, and we're looking at each other and going, we're the only two people in this house. And I go over there, and my kitten, who lived to be the grand old age of 15, it, was trying to pull that tray of the spinach out of the refrigerator.
Wow.
I can't even figure out how he opened the refrigerator, to be honest with you. But for me, yeah, stuffing absolutely has to be it. I mean, it's just like, and then maybe pouring a little gravy over the top of it, and that can be nice. So that's certainly on the list, because all that food, all of that gets to kind of marinate another day,
Right?
All those flavors kind of get to marinate another day into that. So
I've actually
I'm with you.
thought some year I'll make Thanksgiving on Wednesday and reheat it for Thursday, because I think it might be better. I think that sort of extra day of letting everything sort of marinate might make it a little bit better of a meal.
I agree. And I think I was thinking about that the other day too. And I was thinking of like, well, maybe I should make the stuffing like yesterday. I was thinking maybe I should make the stuffing today or last night and give it a couple of days to sit in there and then heat it up and get the crust on the top of the stuffing. And then I realized that I had bell peppers I needed to get on my grocery list that I didn't have so that I could roast them. And I was like, well, I guess I'll wait till this afternoon. So for those of you who are listening to this while traveling, please make sure that you're safe. We want to hear from you again when you get back home, but enjoy your time with your family. If you're hosting at home, please make sure those people get back safe. Even some of the ones that you wish you could, confine to your basement, like your Uncle Lou. But, it's a fun holiday. We hope you enjoy it, however you celebrate it. And, Mark and I are both thankful for, the readers that we have and the listeners that we have. And I'm certainly thankful to have, Mark writing for me at the RSP and all the work that he provides and his friendship. And you guys have a terrific weekend, and we will see you in a couple weeks.